So we're moving on to 5.6, which is solving equations, quadratic equations by factoring. So our goal today is to solve quadratic equations by factoring. So the big idea here is to understand the difference between what a standard form look like and factored form. And when we're dealing with standard form, it's going to look like 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Or maybe it looks the opposite, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It doesn't matter. Either way, that would be considered standard form. Factored form would look like this. There are two binomials, so here's one, here's two, that are multiplied together. A binomial is something with two terms, so x plus or minus a number times x plus or minus a number. Okay? The reason that the factored form will help us, okay, is because if you have two numbers that multiply to 0, so how does factored form lead you to solution? If you have x times y equals 0, this means that either x has to equal 0 or y equals 0, but one of those numbers has to equal 0. If you know that x is 7, the only option for y would be 0. 7 times 0 would get you 0. So it doesn't matter how you want to think about this. But if you have two numbers that are multiplying to 0, one of those numbers must equal 0. So what that means down here then with example 1, here we have two numbers that are multiplying to 0. Because since they're in parentheses, you would have to evaluate this number, multiply the numbers together, but you get 0. So because of that, you know that either the 2x minus 7 number equals 0 or the x plus 4 number equals 0. One of those two numbers equals 0. And then what you're going to do is this is now a linear equation, and this is a linear equation, and you already know how to solve linear equations. So we're going to work at solving these. Add 7 on both sides. X equals 7, divide by 2, you're going to get that x equals 7 halves. So one of the solutions will be x equals 7 halves, and then we go and we solve the other one, and it's x equals negative 4 would be your other solution. So we have x equals 7 halves or x equals negative 4. The next example, we're going to have to work at splitting apart x squared minus 8x plus 16. So how are we going to do that? So what we're going to be doing is on this one, you have your factored form is what we're going to try to make it to. And your first times your first always comes up as that very first term there. Your last times your last comes up as that term. So it's just a trial and error here. Your outside and inside, because what you're going to do here, remember, is just foil. You're unfoiling this. But if you were to go in this direction, you would be foiling it. So here are what we're going to do. So for the x squared, the way you can break that apart is x times x. The way you can break apart 16 is a couple different options. You can try 1 and 16, so plus 1 plus 16, because it's a positive. However, when you do your outside, you'll have 16x, and your inside, you'll have 1x, meaning you should have 17x, which doesn't work. So we're going to erase those, and we're going to try something else. First off, since we saw that the sign was wrong, we know that these both have to be negative numbers. So maybe it's negative 2 times negative 8, which would equal positive 16, but we have to try that outside inside. So your outside is negative 8x, your inside is negative 2x. Negative 8x and negative 2x is negative 10x, which also doesn't work. So now we're going to try 4 and 4. So negative 4 and negative 4. And when we try this, Your first times your first is x squared. Your outside is negative 4x. Your inside is also negative 4x, which is negative 8x. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So this works. This is in factored form, and we didn't change the value of it. We just changed standard form to factored form. From here, we're just going to finish solving. Now, there's a couple different options here because really, you're going to set x minus 4 equal to 0. But if you write this again, we have the exact same equation, so it's not really necessary. And so x equals 4. I don't have to write x equals 4 or x equals 4. They're the exact same answer. But what we call that is a repeated root. And you'll notice that we'll talk about that later in this unit as well. So that's how we would factor it, and then we would find our answer. Let's look at example 3. On example 3, this one is already set equal to 0. So again, we're going to work on writing this in factored form. And the first times the first will give us 2x squared. The only way to really break this apart is by doing 2x times x. Now your last times your last gives us negative 35. So we know one of them has to be a positive and one of them has to be a negative. Now at this point, it's just kind of a guess and check, okay? So you could do positive 5 and negative 7. 5 times 7 is negative 35. But we have to FOIL this to see if it works. So our first is 2x times x is 2x squared. That works. Your outside is actually going to be, let me write this down because this one is going to be a little bit more to memorize. So your outside is negative 14x, and your inside is positive 5x. Does that get you negative 9x? It does. Now, I randomly just guessed on that one. So it was lucky that I had it my first guess. I was able to factor it. However, you might have had the signs mixed up. Maybe you had the negative over here and a positive over here, and you actually had a positive 9x. All that tells you is you just have to switch your signs then and try again. Maybe I tried 35 and 1, and that definitely wouldn't have worked. So if you have the correct value but not the correct sign, just go ahead and switch where your negative sign is on, which one, whether it's with 5 or negative sign. So that worked. That went ahead and factored this. And so then from there, all you're going to do is set each of those equal to 0. So 2x plus 5 equals 0, or x minus 7 equals 0. Here you're going to 2x equals negative 5, or x equals negative 5 halves, or x equals 7. So those are your two solutions there. Well, let's try number 4. Now this one is not set equal to 0. So the first thing you're going to have to do is change it so that it's set equal to 0. Now that we have it set equal to 0, we'll work at factoring it. So your first times your first. Not really sure what happened there. First times your first has to get us to 6x squared. There's a couple different options here, so this one might be a little bit more difficult. Because you could have 6x and x, or 2x and 3x. So you have a couple different options. But your last times your last multiply to negative 4. So, trial and error. So 2x times 3x. Maybe this is a 4 and that's a 1. That's a negative 4, so we need a negative and a positive. So I'm just making this up as we go. It's just a trial and error. So your first times your first is 6x squared. That works. Your last times your last is negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. That works. Now your outside inside numbers. So your outside is 2x. Your inside is minus 12x. That is not going to get us 5x. So because of that, I'm going to try a different number. So I'm going to erase that. I'm going to try a 2 and a 2. Positive 2 and negative 2 do multiply to negative 4. And then my outside would be 4x. My inside would be minus 6x. That's negative 2x. Does not equal negative or positive 5x. So again, that didn't work. So I'm going to leave those two alone. So I'm not really sure about those. I can tell that these, though, because I've done all the factors of 4. I've done positive or 1 and 4 and 2 and negative 2. These signs don't really make a huge difference right now because remember, I never got 5. If I got negative 5, then it would tell me to switch the signs. But since I didn't, I'm going to try to make these 6x and 1x then. So 6x and x. We'll try these ones. The outside then is 12x minus 2x. So that doesn't work either. That gives us 10x, not 5x. So maybe we try the 4 and the 1 this time. So I have, my outside is 6x minus 4x. So it doesn't look like that one is going to work. So that's 2x. Let's go back to, and I can see right now that if I moved the 4 and the 1, that actually will change your options here. If you put the 4 here and the 1 here, you'd have 24x as your outside and negative x. So let me go back to 2 and 3 because I checked everything with the 6x and the 1x. But on the 2 and 3, I didn't change around my 4 and my 1. So let me do that. Okay, so back to this one. Now, my outside was 2x minus 12x, which was negative 10x, so that didn't work. But if you change where the 4 and the 1 are, this will actually change those values because now your outside is 8x minus your inside is 3x, which does give us 5x, so that is your factored form. So you have to be careful because whenever your A value right there is not 1, your outside and your inside do make quite a difference. So it's just a matter of guessing and checking and foiling it to make sure that these two values are equivalent. Once you have it there, you can set 2x minus 1 equal to 0 and 3x plus 4 equal to 0. 2x equals 1, x equals 1/2. That's one option, or 3x equals negative 4, x equals negative 4/3. So those are your two options there. The next one is writing a quadratic equation with these roots as your solutions. So the easiest way to do this is to first write it in factored form. Or write it out as your solutions first. So we do know that x equals 3. Negative 3. Or we know that x equals 1/2. Now when we write this, it says integers, so no fractions are allowed. Okay, so since I don't want, so what I'm going to do is I want to find each of my factors so that I can write it in factored form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of these solutions and I'm going to set them equal to 0. Now this one, all I need to do is add 3 to both sides, and that one's set equal to 0. On this one, over on the right side, I can't have a fraction. So the first thing you're going to do is get rid of the fractions by multiplying both sides by 2. Then it's not set equal to 0, so move over that 1. Now we have our two factors. This is a factor and that's a factor. So I can write it in factored form. X plus 3 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. Once you have it in factored form, it's easy to find your quadratic equation in standard form because all you have to do is FOIL the left side. So we have 2x squared minus x plus 6x minus 3 equals 0. From there, combine like terms, 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. And that would be our final answer of the quadratic equation in standard form. In example number 6, I'm showing you how you do not necessarily have to factor anything because since you do have just an x squared term, you don't have an x squared and an x term, just like back in part 1 when you were looking for x-intercepts and stuff, if it was something like this, you could actually solve it. So the first thing that we're going to do here is add 15 to both sides. So we get 7x squared is equal to 700. Divide both sides by 7. X squared equals 100. And from there, you get x equals positive or negative 10. When you square root both sides, you have to remember that if you are solving an equation, that you're going to get 2 solutions there. Okay, so I just wanted to show that to you again. If you were to factor this one, though, the factors will help you see the positive and the negative 10. So that's just one thing that I did want to point out.